Good evening, dear friends. It is a pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Abdullah Brooks, who is a pediatrician on faculty in the International Vaccine Access Center at Bloomingburg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University, where he works as a scientist in global public health. He graduated from Stanford School of Medicine, underwent training in pediatrics at Cornell University's New York Hospital, then trained in preventative medicine at Johns Hopkins University, where he has also obtained a master's degree in public health. He conducts investigational studies in several infectious diseases, including clinical therapeutic and vaccine trials in collaboration with numerous partners and organizations in Europe, Asia, and the United States. He has served on several scientific advisory boards and is a frequent consultant for the World Health Organization, primarily in the areas of influenza disease control and early childhood pneumonia, and was part of the World Health Organization's Solidarity Working Group investigating COVID-19 diagnostics. That's a lot. So, dear friends, please welcome Dr. Abdullah Brooks.
Unmute yourself, Dr. Brooks, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it's an honor to be invited to speak in this forum. I met Nasser and Ziba some time back, actually it was 38 years ago, on my visit, then as a medical student to the East Coast. I was doing some work at the National Institutes of Health, and my now wife, whom I just met that summer, brought me to Nasser's fireside so that we had an opportunity to meet, and he put me to work right away as a speaker, and I've done a few of these now over the years. And now this is my second time doing it on this Zoom format. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to having really much more of a discussion with you about why religion is important. And to take it from a standpoint that is probably not the most common way people discuss this particular topic. I'm going to do my screen share now, if you don't mind, and show you some slides so you don't need to look at me the whole time while we're having our discussion. Please bring this up and do the screen share. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yep, you're good.
I hope so. Basically, there are a few things that we'll be discussing in this, and let's make sure this works. Really what I want to do is kind of walk through an exercise in the way in which we often talk about the topic of why religion is important, why, what is its role in both the individual and society. But we're going to come at this from a different way, and that is the approach that Baha'u'llah takes in introducing the subject of religion in a book called the Book of Certitude. And it's one that those of you who are interested in the Baha'i faith should certainly read. And, you know, really take a moment to look at what he says is the purpose of creation and our role within it. We'll discuss the two main purposes of religion sort of serially, looking at some context for the discussion of what religion actually does. In science, we have an approach to investigating any question or discussing any particular topic, and that is nothing is ever discussed in a vacuum. We don't invent vaccines in a vacuum. We don't undergo clinical trials in a vacuum. There's always context. How important is this thing that we're trying to do? What do we know about it? What are the parameters? And now what specific question do we have that we have not yet answered? And that's really the approach we'll be taking here in this discussion about why religion is important. there's important context here that goes back thousands of years. And so we'll try and condense this into maybe a 15-minute discussion on just some background. Then we'll talk about why free will, here stated as volition, is important and what role that has in our interaction with religion. And then look at what are some of the indicators of success for its influence in the role of the individual and the practice of religion. Then we'll look at what the Baha'i faith refers to as collective centers, and the role of religion as a collective center and its indicators of success in that regard. And then take a moment too to address something that will always come up in these discussions, and that is, well, if religion is so important, or if we think it is such a good thing for humanity, then why is it being such a prolific source of war and division? What do we have to say about that? And so we'll take a moment to see what the Baha'i faith says about that particular thing, and as we wrap this up. And so we'll then summarize where we are and open this up for some questions and discussions. Now, before I begin, I just want to make sure that for those who may know little about the Baha'i faith, I'll just say just a couple of sentences about it. The Baha'i faith is an independent world religion. It is its own religion. It's not a sect or a branch of any other religion. Its founder's name is Baha'u'llah, which in Arabic means the glory of God. We as Baha'is believe that it falls in the long line of the world's major faiths, whether it be Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism, etc., that just as those have had a prophet founder who claimed to have a revelation directly from God, revealed a book, gave laws and teachings, in the same way, Baha'u'llah plays that same role or fulfills that same function with regard to the Baha'i faith. And thus it is named after him. We are Baha'is, followers of Baha'u'llah. It has also a forerunner who is himself an independent manifestation of God. These founders of the world's religions we refer to as manifestations of God, because we as Baha'is believe we cannot see or directly interact with God, but God sends these messengers who manifest his image, his likeness, his qualities, but most importantly, that's that divine spirit of guidance and purification that changes us into being better human beings and hopefully makes the world a better place. But that said, each of them too leaves this repository or this book that is there for our guidance for hundreds to over 1,000 years. In the same way that Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God, his forerunner, likewise, we believe, is a manifestation of God. And his name was the Ba, which in Arabic means the gate. And while he founded his own religion, he foretold the immediate coming of the advent of Baha'u'llah and this fulfillment, really, of a prophecy that we recognize as, or believe to be, the fulfillment of the kingdom, the coming of the kingdom of God on earth, a time when all of humanity will come together and we will see a cessation of war and hopefully unity worldwide. So that is a little bit about the Baha'i faith and its essential figures. One more figure that I'll name and we'll be referring to quite a bit is Baha'u'llah's eldest son, Abdul Baha. His role is unique in religious history in that Baha'u'llah gave or wrote what's called the Book of the Covenant, in which he made a pact with all of the followers of the Baha'i faith, and that is they should turn not only to his son for guidance, but that there is a center of authority for this faith, which is after Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and then the administrative order that Baha'u'llah created. All Baha'is observe that covenant, and Abdul Baha is referred to as the center of the covenant. And so he was given the authority to interpret Baha'u'llah's teachings for us so that we are free from having to everyone have their own opinions and therefore forming divisions that could break off into different sects and denominations. There are none of these in the Baha'i faith because of the covenant of Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha plays a central role in that. And so we'll be referring quite a bit to some of the things that he has had to say about this subject. So with that said, let me go on now to the next slide and talk about scientific knowledge and inquiry. This is a photograph of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. And he said this: scientific knowledge is of two kinds, material and spiritual. Material science is the investigation of natural phenomena. Divine science is the discovery and realization of spiritual verities. Both are necessary, one material, the other divine. And then he says, by divine, we mean the discovery of the mysteries of God, the comprehension of spiritual realities, the wisdom of God, inner significances of the heavenly religions, and the foundation of the law. So from a Baha'i perspective, not only is science important, but science is of two kinds, again, material and spiritual. My professional life is devoted to material science, but my Baha'i life is devoted to the investigation of spiritual science. And the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, who was appointed the guardian of the Baha'i faith after the passing of Abdul Baha, his name was Shoghi Effendi. He said that the Baha'i faith is scientific in its method. And as a scientist, I can assert this is absolutely the truth. The approach that the Baha'i faith takes to understanding spiritual phenomena is really quite scientific in nature. When Abdul Baha visited the United States and Canada, one of the places he spoke was at the African Methodist Church in Washington, and there he made a comment about the foundation of both science and religion. And he said that the foundation of science and religion is the same. The foundation of both is reason. And that it is important that reason is a core bedrock of religious belief, because without that, we are left with a resort to superstition and dogma. And these are divisive and lead to not merely superstition, but imitations and the breaking up of that religious faith. So everything that the Baha'i faith teaches is on this foundation of reason. And a core principle of the Baha'i faith is the independent investigation of truth or reality. And so we believe that in discussing anything we do, it not only is it something where each individual has the right, but really the obligation to investigate, to understand for themselves. Baha'u'llah equates this principle of investigation with divine justice. He says, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. He says, by its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. He says, ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Justice is my gift to thee and the sign of my loving kindness. So that in this day we believe that as an aspect of this divine justice, all of us are not only encouraged, but really required to understand things and investigate reality for ourselves. And so this approach to religion is not one in which we just simply blindly accept dogmatic assertions, but there are things for us to read, investigate, understand, and process. So now in science, every investigation and discovery begins with not only context, but within that context, asking the right questions. Now, often when it comes to a discussion about religion, not always, but very frequently, these discussions revolve ultimately to a discussion of the benefits versus the risk to the individual. These are the things one gets. These are the things that it can do for you, improve one's life, better one's relations, make one's family life perhaps more stable. All the rest of this, to ignore these things opens us up to all manner of risks. And then if you believe in an afterlife, and most religions insist that there is an afterlife, then certainly one of the benefits is if you follow this religion, you get to go to the good place, and if you don't, you go to a bad place, or bad things will happen to you. So it really comes down to a discussion often of benefits and risks or losses. Baha'u'llah On the other hand, in this book I mentioned before, the Book of Certitude, where he talks about the reality of all the great faiths. And this is the book that we as Baha'is believe was foretold as the book that would open the seven seals and make all truth of religion evident to everyone. In that book, Baha'u'llah takes a very different approach. And he begins with a very different question. And that is who we are and why we're here. Because that then provides context to what religion actually is and should be about. One of in fact, the leading institution of the Baha'i faith, again, founded on that covenant of Baha'u'llah, is called the Universal House of Justice. It's made up of 9 individuals elected every 5 years, and it's headquartered in Haifa, Israel. Recently, they issued a letter to the Baha'i community, and they spoke about where we are right now in human history and said that we are now faced with a crisis of identity. And it is that very identity that Baha'u'llah begins his own mission with, discussing who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. One of the big questions in science, certainly in the anthropological sciences, has been to try to understand what it is that defines humanity. Who are we? What makes us distinct from other creatures or other animals, if anything? And in that discussion, we've gone over many different subjects, whether it's the size and morphology, that is the shape of our brains, the use of language, the use of tools, the complexity of our societies. All these things are being looked at. And in every case, science has come back with the conclusion that this is not unique to humanity. None of these things are. We thought at one point a large brain is what made us distinct, and that's what gave us our intelligence. And then we discovered that birds, which have very small brains, some of which are very intelligent, like the crow family, and can problem solve, use tools, and have a language. In fact, we in English have a word that you may or may not know. We actually got from crows, which indigenous peoples in the Americas first picked up and gave it to white settlers. And that word is hawk. And it's what crows say when they see a hawk. And we now use that word. We got that actually from a bird. But the use of language is not unique to human beings. Whales have language and so on. The complexity of societies. We've seen again that many different animals have very complex societies. So what is it that really distinguishes human beings from anything else? And why are we different if we are unique or special in any way, shape, or form? Baha'u'llah says we are. And in one of his writings, he says this: having created the world and all that liveth and moveth therein, he, referring to God, through the direct operation of his unconstrained and sovereign will, chose to confer upon man the unique distinction and capacity to know him and to love him. So according to Baha'u'llah, what makes us unique is that we alone, of all creatures, have been given the capacity to know God and to worship him. And according to Baha'u'llah, this is an innate and inseparable quality of the human soul. We instinctively aspire towards transcendence. We look out up at the night sky and are struck with awe and wonder, why are we here? What does all this mean? And how was this created? Who created it? We are moved to aspire towards understanding these deep and probing questions. But then he says this. He says this capacity, this unique distinction and capacity to know God and to love him, he says that capacity must needs be regarded as the generating impulse and the primary purpose underlying the whole of creation. According to Baha'u'llah, all that exists is here to serve that purpose of that entity that can know God and to worship him. We're going to come back to that in greater detail in just a moment. But he goes on to say that upon the inmost reality of each and every created thing, God has shed the light of one of his names and made it the recipient of his glory and attributes. But upon the reality of man, he's focused the radiance of all of his names and attributes and made it a mirror of his own self. Alone of all created things, man hath been singled out for so great a favor, so enduring a bounty. So, according to Baha'u'llah, yes, we are unique. And yes, there is a distinguishing feature in man. And this is what defines humanity, is this capacity to know God and to worship him. And to sort of make this point, recently, we came across this small hominid. I'll just take a moment I found this fascinating. Again, I'm a scientist, but recently, I'd say in the past 2 to 3 years, insofar as I'm aware, we came across this hominid named Homo naledi. And this was a cave site in South Africa, about 100,000 years old. The species is older than that, and is not a direct ancestor of ours, but certainly was a hominid like we are. And this hominid had a small brain, about the size of a chimpanzee, and no more complex by all evidence from looking at the brain case. What they found about this hominid is that it engaged in a unique ritual. These people, these hominids, when anyone would die, would carry their dead through great laborious work into a complex tunnel, into a cave that would require current human beings' equipment to be able to get through and get to the bottom of. But at the very base of this cave, going through all sorts of twists and turns, it had this cathedral-like opening. It just inspired awe. They also found markings on the cave wall that seemed to indicate this being a very special place. But most importantly, what they found was there were burial sites. These weren't where carcasses were dumped. They were lovingly placed in a fetal position and each given their own, not only unique burial place, but with each one, provisions for a journey were being made. And that this species of hominid believed clearly that there was an afterlife, and made the and prepared gave, if you would, artifacts to be carried into the next world, or prepared that soul for its journey into the next world. But they did believe in an afterlife. There were other things about this site and dwelling that made it clear that there were other belief systems about this particular species. But the point that I want to make is that we and chimpanzees diverged with a common ancestor about 6 million years ago. This hominid species had a brain no larger than that of a chimpanzee. To my knowledge, no creature has yet been found to show that it's even conscious of an afterlife except humanity. And this is an intrinsic quality, according to Baha'u'llah, that all humanity shares. And this is an early form of humanity. And so, again, we find that even as far back as a primitive species as this is something that is intrinsic to its character. So, it goes to Baha'u'llah's point that religion is not some artifact of superstition, but rather it's a core part of our identity as humanity. Now, about that capacity to recognize spirituality, this is a latent capacity and it needs to be tapped and harnessed. And so Baha'u'llah writes this: these energies with which the day star of bounty and the source of heavenly guidance hath endowed the reality of man lie latent within him, even as the flame is hidden within the candle and the rays of light are potentially present in the lamp. So just like a candle, it potentially can give light, but it has to be lit. The radiance of these energies may be obscured by worldly desires, even as the light of the sun can be concealed beneath the dust and dross which cover the mirror. And he says this, and this is a key part of this: neither the candle nor the lamp can be lighted through their own unaided efforts, nor can it ever be possible for the mirror to free itself from its dross. It is clear and evident that until a fire is kindled, the lamp will never be ignited. And unless the dross is blotted from the face of the mirror, it can never represent the image of the sun, nor reflect its light and glory. So Baha'u'llah is very clear that by our own unaided efforts, we are unable to light that spiritual flame within ourselves, and that we are in need of something in order to do that and unlock that potential. And it goes back really to a theme that is repeated throughout Baha'i sacred scriptures, and that is, the cause of our creation. We already had one quote about our creation, but there are others that sort of focus on the nature of the relationship between the Creator and ourselves. And so among these are these two of the hidden words. This is a small book of quotations that are really special in the Baha'i faith. And we're going to come back to a couple more of these down the road. But here he says this: "O Son of Man, veiled in my immemorial being, and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee. Therefore I created thee, have engraved on thee mine image, and revealed to thee my beauty." And again he says, "I love thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life." What Baha'u'llah describes in the Baha'i faith is a interactive, dynamic relationship between God and his creation. And then he says this: "O son of being, love me, thou lovest. My love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant." Baha'u'llah insists that at all times, even before we ask, God's love and his hand of assistance is extended to us even before we ask. He gives the analogy, however, that relationship is not unlike that of a flower with the sun or a plant with the sun, that the plant is dependent upon the light of the sun, the heat of the sun for its life and to sustain itself. It cannot by its own efforts grow and develop. It requires the energy of the sun to do so. But should that plant turn away from the sun or have something coming between it and the sun where it cannot reach those rays or receive those rays, then the plant will die. And this is akin to those who, if they choose, and we're going to come back to the question of choice and why choice is so important in religion, that if one chooses not to accept that love or turns away from it, then it cannot benefit that individual. God's love will not be able to reach them. It's as if there is a wall or a cloud or a cave that separates that plant from the source of light and life, for its sustenance and growth. So that's an analogy that he uses. But the point is that this dynamic, this relationship between God and humanity is dynamic. And without that reciprocal relationship, the soul cannot benefit from the love that God sends. And he says just this: "O befriended stranger, the candle of thine heart is lighted by the hand of my power. Quench it not with the contrary winds of self and passion. The healer of all thine ills is remembrance of me, forget it not. Make my love thy treasure and cherish it, even as thy very sight and life." And we had said before that Baha'u'llah insists that the heart cannot kindle itself any more than a candle can enkindle itself. So it requires an external source to become enkindled. And it's that dynamic relationship between the Creator, who provides us with our spiritual sustenance, and the individual to unlock that latent potential within us. All these potential capabilities are there, but they're latent and they have to be developed and nurtured. And he refers to this really as spiritual education. This is a quote in which he says that, man is the supreme talisman. Lack of a proper education, however, hath deprived him of that which he doth inherently possess. And he speaks about how through the words revealed by God, we were not only were called into being, but we were guided by one word more to recognize the source of our education, and by yet another to attain our station and safeguard our destinies. So that, it's this relationship, this dynamic relationship between God and his creation that enables us to really share in that reflection of, if you will, the reality of God with our own spiritual natures, which he says is made in his image. I have made thee in mine image. So this is that relationship, but it does require that interaction between God and the recipient, us, humanity. And so briefly, we're going to cover these two aspects of what Baha'u'llah says is the goal of religion. The first really is to unlock the latent potential in the individual, but the second is to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. So we'll go through this one by one and begin with really what is the goal of education? That is the spiritual education that is inherent in religion. In the Holy Quran, there is a surah in which God says that he has created all things in pairs. And he gives several examples and analogies. Amongst those, of course, is male and female in a single species. But inside, in the human soul, there's also a duality. We have two natures. One is our material nature, which is everything to do with our physical lives, our physical body, and our physical needs. The other is a spiritual nature that needs to be awakened and nurtured, and that these two are essential in defining what we are. The one certainly is a physical life that can also be a rich intellectual life as well. But then there is the need for a spiritual life that informs the character of that person to make that person an exponent of net good in the world, as opposed to being simply self-serving and self-interested. And so there is this tension between our material selves and our spiritual selves. They, in fact, need to be harmonized. And so one of the effects of spiritual teaching is to harmonize our material and our spiritual aspects so that these become not only harmonious, but again, in the world in which we live, an exponent of net good and benefit, not only to ourselves, but to others. And we'll come back to that. In one of the first books Abdul Baha ever wrote, it's called Secret of Divine Civilization, which his father had requested him to write in order to help people appreciate the importance or really what it is that religion does for humanity. Amongst the things that Abdul Baha says here is that of all the realities in existence, God has chosen the reality of man and honored it with intellect and wisdom, the two most luminous lights in either world. And he goes on to talk about what this does to enlighten the world and become the light of the world. Again, the human mind, when it is informed. And he says, this supreme emblem of God stands first in order of creation, first in rank, taking precedence over all created things. And he says, he cites an Islamic tradition that says, before all else, God created the mind. He says, from the dawn of creation, it was made to be revealed in the temple of man. So a primacy is placed upon the mind. And in the Baha'i sacred scriptures, we often use the term mind, soul, spirit interchangeably. And Baha'u'llah says they really are interchangeable. They represent one reality. But it is that capacity to not only grasp reality, understand reality, but to put reality to use through the tools that we create and the services that we create for one another that allow us to be an exponent of net good in the world. And so Abdul Baha draws attention to the importance of education, but with a primacy on our spiritual education, even before the material education. And so when the Baha'i writings discuss our education, inevitably, it is linked to the question of sacrifice. And that might seem counterintuitive, but a big part of what we're going to dwell on. I'm going to really sort of focus on these next two slides here for a moment, because this goes to the very heart of what it is that religion is doing and what the Baha'i faith refers to as that mystic intercourse between God and his creation. Because of this duality inside our natures, our physical and our spiritual, we require an alteration in our worldview, which is what religion actually does for us. It opens up to us vistas that we would not see otherwise, and would not otherwise appreciate how this world actually works to our spiritual benefit, but only if we understand what we're dealing with and how we should respond to certain things. And amongst those things is the question of sacrifice, which is core to our growth and development. Again, that sounds counterintuitive. If you say that someone must sacrifice, we think of removing something, losing something, doing without something. In fact, sacrifice is the process of birth and creation. Without sacrifice, there can be no life. There can be no growth. So I'll give a couple of analogies about how this works. And again, but for religion, this is not something that would intuitively occur to the human mind. And we'll have a few other examples of this as we go through this. Abdul Baha gives an example of iron. And he says, this is a talk he gave while here in the United States. He said, think of iron, the substance we call iron. It is black, it is solid, it is cold. He says, now think of the properties of fire. It is light, it is fluid, and it is heat. When you put the iron into the fire, then it begins gradually to take on the properties of the fire. The iron, formerly black, begins to glow and become luminous. Formerly, it was solid, it begins to melt, it becomes fluid. Formerly, it was cold, now it becomes warm and hot. And the longer it stays in the fire, the more it takes on the properties of the fire. He says, in like manner, this is our interaction with spiritual truth. The more we immerse ourselves in the teachings of our Creator, the more we immerse ourselves in the power of his creative word, the more we become transformed and take on those qualities of divinity and move away from simply the strictly physical world and begin to take on the properties of the spiritual world, which informs our full character. He then gives another analogy, which is really perhaps even more illustrative. He talks about a seed. And he says that in order for the seed to become a tree, or in order for a tree to grow, the seed must be sacrificed. When you think of a seed, it's a small thing inside of a hard shell. It's round, it's self-contained, it's perfectly safe, it's impervious to all of the horrible potential influences of the world around it. It can resist fire, it can resist ingestion, it can resist cold, all sorts of things. And the seed in this self-contained shell is safe and secure. But it can never fulfill its potential unless it sacrifices its current condition. And so from the standpoint, you think of growth from the standpoint of a seed. Here you are, all self-contained, all perfectly safe, and you're happy. And then suddenly, under the influence of the rays of the sun, your shell cracks. Now, to the seed, this may seem traumatic. And like all of a sudden, my self-contained world is broken, and I've lost something. And so the seed is not able to appreciate necessarily this new transformation, and in fact, may see it as a threat to its existence. But as this process continues, then it begins to send down roots into the ground, into the soil, and begin to draw something it never did before, nourishment from an unseen source. This has never happened before. And as that happens, it begins to acquire leaves, and it begins to grow. And as it grows, it goes through various stages until at last it becomes a fully mature tree that begins to bear fruit of its own, each with new seeds that begin to spread that through the rest of the world. And so it becomes a thing that it could never have imagined, but it could never have achieved that unless we're willing to sacrifice its original condition and change. And so those changes, it might see as stresses and sacrifice and challenges, but in the end, something wonderful was born from that. And Baha'u'llah says that this is the nature of our interaction with our difficulties, our challenges, and our tests in the world. All of the physical world around us, he says, is continually reminding us that this is not our home. Baha'u'llah, in the hidden words, speaking with the voice of God, says, "Thy heavenly home is reunion with me. Now enter therein and tarry not. This is that which hath been destined for thee in our kingdom above, in our exalted dominion." Here in the physical world, as we interact with it, we will go through any number of tests and challenges, but this material world, because everything around it changes, it is, he says, telling us that we cannot rely on it. There's nothing permanent here. And so this is not our home. As Abdul Baha says, the physical world is man's tomb. This is where we bury our bodies. But while we're here, it's a learning ground. And this is where we learn to develop those spiritual capacities that we will need for our eternal existence in the next world. And so all of this, what religion does, it gives us a very different perspective on what these tests and challenges mean, and to allow us then to see these not as a bad thing when they happen, but as a net good, and to embrace them wholeheartedly and learn and benefit from them in the process. The things that we often value are things that, according to Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i writings, are not the things that we necessarily need. In fact, they can be not only distractions, they can actually prevent us from growing and developing in the ways in which we actually should grow and develop. And so in one of his writings, he says, thou dost wish for gold, and I desire thy freedom from it. Now, gold is a metaphor for not just simply the precious metal, but things that we value, things that we in the material world see as advantageous, whether it is material wealth, whether it's power, whether it's title, status, a network of people who can do many things for us, whatever it is that we value and treasure. He says, "Now thou thinkest thyself rich in its possession, and I recognize thy wealth and thy sanctity therefrom." We as human beings spend a great deal of our lives, particularly in the Western world, trying to acquire things that will redound to our well-being, particularly material things. And so a great deal of emphasis is placed on acquiring material wealth, being secure, having a nice home, etc., etc. And those things are good and useful. This is not to say that they're not, but they should not be the object of all that we do or the reason why we exist, because they're not. And so in one of his tablets, the Bab, Baha'u'llah's forerunner, says, everything in the world, and the estimation of those who have recognized their creator, he says, everything in the world is worth less than the black in the eye of a dead ant. That's a startling statement. And it's not hyperbole. In fact, it's truth and reality. We stop and think about it. Everything we see in the world, even the precious metal gold, is made up of atoms. And atoms are basically made up of a nucleus and a shell of electrons, which is primarily empty space, all of it. And those configurations can change to make gold. They can change to make carbon. They can change to basically make silicon or dust. And they're all interchangeable. And the atoms can go from one to another and be a part of each of these different things at various different stages of the life of the atom. But the point is, it's primarily empty space. And what's more, it's not something that we can take with us. It has no intrinsic value. It's here, Baha'u'llah says, while learning. And in thinking about that analogy as this being this world, this physical world, being our temporary home where we're here to learn, to grow and develop, one can think of it like a school. And if you think back to schools, you can recall back that far to when you may have been in preschool or even kindergarten. And in that school, you would probably have found blocks to play with, Legos, whatever it was, things that you could do to not only amuse yourself, but importantly, to learn to build things, to challenge your mind and to develop your mind. Now imagine being in that school, and this is a real analogy to our passing through this world. That school is not your home. This is where you've been sent to learn and grow. You may have gone there voluntarily. You may have had to be dragged there kicking and screaming by your parents, but either way, you were there, and you were there to learn for a very specific purpose. And there you knew that you had a home outside of it. But while you're here in school, you engage with this play, you engage with these toys. And so what are you going to do with these things, these blocks or these Legos? You may try to ignore them and just push them away. That's an option. You may think that maybe the goal is to acquire as many of them as you can and hoard them. That's also an option. Or you may begin to challenge yourself, challenge your mind, and try to make something, to build something that can benefit you and perhaps even be shared with a playmate for mutual enjoyment and pleasure. But either way, we begin to show what we can do by using these things. But at the end of the day, whatever we choose to do with these things, when we go home, we leave those Legos at school. They don't go home with us. And the same thing here with our material possessions and our material wealth. Whatever we have, whatever we acquire, whatever title and all that, we leave all that here when we go, and we carry away what we've learned into the next world and how we've grown and developed. And so Baha'u'llah, in one of the hidden words I mentioned before, says, free thyself from the fetters of this world and loose thy soul from the prison of self. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more. And this, again, I'm dwelling on these particular points because they're core to this thing about what religion, the role religion plays in human life. There is this interplay in the Bahá'í writings about the nature of our growth in this world, and that this is the one world and the only world in which our growth is conditioned by the choices we make. This is why it's so important that we understand that we do have choice, and it's important to exercise that choice. I already mentioned before that, well, let me just stop you for a second and just finish this thought, that if we think about the world before this, the world of the womb, which we often think is a part of our world, but really is a distinct and separate world. The growing embryo is separated from us, is not aware of us. It exists, in the placenta of its mother, shielded from the outer world around it. And although we see it as a part of our world, in the same way, our physical world is a part of the spiritual world. Baha'u'llah says that those souls in the next world, they're very much aware of us. In fact, they know us better than we know ourselves. And we are a part of their world. And we're growing, we are like a placenta growing in this physical world into the spiritual world into which we will eventually be born. Importantly, he says that in the world of the womb, we didn't have choice as to how we grew. That was dictated strictly by nature and nature's laws. And fortunately, we didn't have to think about, do I need eyes, do I need legs? Because we never would have developed those. We had no use for them in the world of the womb. They would have only begun to take up space and make us less and less comfortable as we got larger and larger. So fortunately, we had no choice but to develop those. In the next world, Baha'u'llah says, we do not grow by the choices we make, but by intercession. That is, we can intercede on our own behalf and on behalf of other people through prayer and through good works. But it is not through simply the choices we make. This is the one world in which we can choose to do or not do, to acquire these spiritual qualities or not to acquire them. But the choices we make determines how much spirituality we actually can acquire. And so he says that this opportunity comes once and it will come to us no more. And all these underscore the urgency with which every prophet of God who's come into the world has tried to give this message to humanity, each in a way that that particular age would understand, and in a language that particular age would understand. But in this age of what Baha'u'llah says is the coming of the age of maturity, we can understand these in a very descriptive way that conforms to our use of reason and capacity to understand. And therefore, we no longer are speaking in terms of fiery pits and paradise, but the condition of human perfection, and having acquired or not acquired the essential things we need in order to live a rich and rewarding life in this world as well as the next. And so he says that there are people, he gives in one of his tablets an analogy, not an analogy, but he speaks of souls entering the next world and realizing for the first time that everything they understood in sacred scripture was real, but they didn't believe it. And either it was because of what other people said and did and they followed their way, or for whatever reason, they didn't accept it. And now they realize this was real. And they are filled with remorse and they wish to come back. And they can no more come back to this world and acquire those things they didn't do while they were here than can a newborn babe return to the womb of its mother and acquire, let's say, a missing arm or missing leg or some other vital organ. It's just simply not possible. It's not how our life works. So while we are here, he says, seize our chance, what will come to us no more. This is the place to develop those capacities for uses that we can only begin to dream of as what role those spiritual susceptibilities will play for our spiritual life in the next world. But that's why the prophets of God have been willing to make even the ultimate sacrifice, death, and even the death of some of their followers, in order to awaken us to the urgency of the short time that we're here and to make the best use of it. And, to again show just how much this reshapes the way we think and see the world, the Bab, in one of his prayers, said this, and this is so counterintuitive to the way in which we normally think. In his prayer, he says, indeed, shouldst thou, in his prayer to God, shouldst thou desire to confer blessing upon a servant, thou wouldst blot out from the realm of his heart every mention or disposition except thine own mention. And this is key, and shouldst thou ordain evil for a servant by reason of that which his hands have unjustly wrought before thy face, thou wouldst test him with the benefits of this world and of the next, that he might become preoccupied therewith and forget thy remembrance. It is astonishing to think that the things that we cherish, the benefits of this world, would in fact constitute punishment if they're given to us in such abundance that we are distracted by them and basically forget our, as he says, forget God's remembrance, that relationship we have with him, forget ourselves and leave here as undeveloped as when we entered it. But that is what punishment would constitute. And having seen the purpose of life from that perspective, it now comports with reason and it makes sense. Yes, I mean, these challenges, these tests have a purpose to help us to recognize the things that are important in life. Now, I'll just pause here for a minute and talk about something else. Earlier, when we mentioned often the ways in which we talk about why religion is important, it's given as sort of a benefit risk assessment of what it can do for us and the things that can happen if we don't have it. So looking at risk and reward. And the Bab was very clear about the fact that it is not about risk and reward. It's not about reward and punishment. Yes, in older scriptures from eons past, it was often couched in that way to address a level of understanding that humanity had then, but now we can understand it in a different way. And he says this, worship thou God in such wise that if thy worship lead thee to the fire, no alteration in thine adoration would be produced. And so likewise, if thy recompense be paradise, thus and thus alone should be the worship which befitteth the one true God. And he says that if we worship him because of fear, this would be unseemly. Likewise, if we worshiped him hoping to get some benefit, we'd be attempting to make God's creation a partner with him. It's like bargaining with him. Okay, God, if you give me this, then I'll give you my worship, but I expect this in return. And this also is unworthy. And he says that, fire and paradise both bow down and prostrate themselves before God. That which is worthy of his essence is to worship him for his sake without fear of fire or hope of paradise. So it really is that it goes back to that bond of love that we have, that love that causes him to create us, and that he wishes us to be a sharer in that beautiful spiritual reality with him by acquiring these capacities for ourselves while yet on earth. Back up. So there are, I think I must have skipped one slide. Let me just see if I can come out of this, and I'm trying to go back one slide and it's not letting me go back. So what I'll do is, see if I can recall what I had on that previous slide. There are a couple. I'm sorry?
Maybe Alex can help.
Oh, yes. I don't know if I can. Alex, can you back up one slide? I don't know if you, I think only I have control of this.
Yeah, only you have control. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to just go ahead and see if I can recall what I had there. Not to worry. But the point that was being made on the previous slides was that in one of his tablets, Abdul-Baha talks about the meaning of tests. There are several challenges that we have in this life that come to us, that he says that if you think about life, our physical existence, all of the difficulties that we face arise from our material existence. In the Holy Quran, God indicates 5 means by which humanity is tested, none of which can be avoided. And amongst these includes things such as famine or hunger, poverty, a decline in powers, such as our, whatever powers and authorities we have in the world, the loss or change of those over time, sickness, and death. These 5 things we have no control over. And these summarize basically the categories of challenges that we face, whether it be destruction of our property, a fire, famine, war, whatever it is, a loss of power, loss of our job, source of income, insecurity. All of these things are the things that vex and trouble us, and they come to every life. No one can escape these 5 forces. At some point, one or all of them, certainly death, will touch everyone. The loss of a loved one, the loss of parents, grandparents, perhaps the loss of a spouse, and worse yet, the loss of a child. All of these things happen to us, and they're unavoidable. And it is at that moment, Abdul-Baha says, that it causes the soul to recoil from the physical world and turn towards its spiritual sustenance, look for spiritual sustenance. And it makes us more susceptible to this. And by this means, we become, by degrees, more and more detached from the physical world, place less reliance on it, and feed and sustain our spiritual nature. But the role of tests and that nature of sacrifice, not just sacrificing our old form, like the seed, to become a tree, becoming less and less, self-centered and self-absorbed, and living just within the self, but beginning to reach out in a way that will make us more beneficial, not only to ourselves, but to other people around us. and that this is really what these tests and these challenges do. And he goes on to say that, the honor and distinction of the individual. Oh, that's one other quote I was going to share here about these indicators of success. Like, how do we know when we are beginning to succeed in whatever spiritual growth we're trying to have? The Bab, in one of his tablets, says that no thing can that the paradise of any created thing, be it a mineral, a plant, a human being, is its state of perfection. And he gives the analogy of the mineral world, a stone, that the state of perfection for the stones is to attain to become a gem, like a ruby or a diamond, a crystal, something of value with beauty. That this is its state of perfection. The state of perfection for a plant is that it bears fruit. The state for a human being of perfection is that it acquires these capacities, these abilities, these spiritual susceptibilities that make it a useful, beneficial human being, both for itself as well as to others. And in this book that we mentioned before, Secret of Divine Civilization, Abdul-Baha writes this: the honor and distinction of the individual consists in this, that he become, among all the world's multitudes, should become a source of social good. Is any larger bounty conceivable than this, that an individual looking within himself should find that by the confirming grace of God, he has become the cause of peace and well-being, of happiness and advantage to his fellow men? No, by the one true God, there is no greater bliss, no more complete delight. Using that same analogy of the tree, Baha'u'llah in the Hidden Words says, "Ye are the trees of my garden. Ye must give forth goodly and wondrous fruits, that ye yourselves and others may profit therefrom." This is the real nature of man, and the indication that we've achieved it is that we begin to be a benefit to ourselves and others. Now, this leads to this second major function of religion, according to the Baha'i teachings, and that is that they serve as collective centers. What does that mean? It means that in addition to us becoming better human beings, these become the means by which we are brought into interaction with a ever enlarging circle of other human beings in a way that becomes mutually beneficial. And so Abdul-Baha gives a narration in which he explains that we are part of an ever-advancing civilization. That, for example, if you look at just the Abrahamic faiths that we had with the coming of Abraham, the organization of the family as we currently understand it, and the relationships that we currently have as families, and understanding those relationships. With the revelation of Moses, he took the people, the disparate tribes dispersed in Israel, and formed them into 12 tribes, bringing these families into larger units of organization, and founded a great civilization in Judea and Israel. If you look at then the coming of Jesus, he says at that time, the Jews, the Romans, the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, these were all enemies, and he made them all one people. And they formed even larger aggregates that crystallized during the period of the height of Christendom into city-states. And so a larger ingathering, a collective center of people. And then under Islam, yet a larger group was formed, and that is not only tribes and cities and families, but the organization of people into nation states as we currently understand what a nation state to be. This took place under Islam, achieving its height really under several different dynasties, but that organization of nation state was the fruit of Islam. And so at this point in our journey, Baha'u'llah has said that the greatest need for mankind, and it's imperative, is for world unity, the coming together of all of humanity, that having reached the stage of maturity, he says, the earth is but one country, and mankind is citizens. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country, let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. And the goal of this ingathering, then this progressive, collective center, is to be both a material but also a spiritual civilizing force. So there are implements that go with this growth of larger cities and developments and nations, but importantly, and most importantly, are the laws that govern our interaction with one another that allow us to live peaceably as these larger aggregates. And so Baha'u'llah says our greatest challenge at this point in time, and the one thing that alone prevents us from fulfilling our complete destiny, is the lack of unity as a human family. And so ultimately, we have to recognize that we are one people, we have one origin, we have one creator, and we share a common destiny. In one of his writings, he says this, speaking with the voice of God, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how you were created. Baha'u'llah points out that there are no boundaries other than the ones that we imagine between us. There are no differences. There should be no differences based on nationality. These are a human invention. There should be no differences based on race. Again, race is a human invention. There should be no differences based on language. These are human inventions. All these things by which we distinguish ourselves, even our religious affiliations, these can become barriers if we choose to see them as barriers rather than recognizing their common origin, because all these religions come from the same God at different periods, but from the same God. And so all of these need to be overcome and can be overcome by the recognition of a common humanity and that we are one family. Let me go to the next one. For some reason now I'm not able to advance my slide. I think I know why. Okay, so we had mentioned before that if religion is supposed to represent this collective center for our benefit, if it is to assist us to become better individuals, and then assist us in seeing the inherent diversity that exists amongst us, not as a barrier, but rather as a means to a means of attraction, unity in diversity, a source of beauty. To use the analogy that Abdul gives, all the variation in humanity are like different flowers in a garden. If all the flowers look alike, that garden would be less pleasing to the eye than if we saw variegation. If we saw violets and roses and daisies and so forth, all in one place, that would be a beautiful garden, a more beautiful garden, and certainly a more robust and healthy garden because of its diversity. It's the diversity that gives us our strength, and therefore should be a cause of binding and not of repulsion. But if, in fact, religion is to do that, then how is it that religion has become such a source of conflict and disagreement, and perhaps one of the most prolific sources of war? And so he says this, Abdul Baha, in addressing this, he said this to a gathering here in North America. He says, religions are many, but the reality of religion is one. The days are many, but the sun is one. The fountains are many, but the fountainhead is one. The branches are many, but the tree is one. The foundation of the divine religions is reality. There is no reality. Were there no reality, there would be no religions. Abraham heralded reality. Moses promulgated reality. Christ established reality. Muhammad was the messenger of reality. The Bab was the door of reality. Baha'u'llah was the splendor of reality. Reality is one. It does not admit multiplicity or division. And he talks about, again, the sun, its different dawning points. He says, therefore, if the religions investigate reality and seek the essential truth of their foundations, they will agree and no difference will be found. But inasmuch as religions are submerged in dogmatic imitations, forsaking the original foundations, And as imitations differ widely, therefore the religions are divergent and antagonistic. These imitations may be likened to clouds which obscure the sunrise, but reality is the sun. He says, once the clouds disperse, the sun of reality shines upon all, and no differences of vision will exist. Then the religions will agree, for fundamentally they are the same. The subject is one, but the predicates are many. He goes through this theme in multiple ways, but the point is, to the degree that humanity turns away from those core essential truths of those religions and begins to add these various dogmas and creeds, things that were not there at the founding of the religion by that prophet founder, these are the things that divide us. And more importantly, in the hands of ambitious men, and they have been primarily men, they have become tools for the acquisition of power. This too becomes another thing by which we make religion a tool for division. And add to that any racial or nationalistic element, and again, you have a tool for division. But this is not inherent to the religion itself, because the core beliefs of all the religions are based on the same fundamental truth, which, as Baha'u'llah points out, is that we should treat others as we ourselves would be treated. That is the law, and it is the core law that has the golden rule persisted through all of time and eternity, and will remain so. So ultimately, religion should serve as a collective center. So having said that, basically, just as we have indicators for success for the individual that they see in themselves, a benefit to themselves as well as to others, the indicator of success that these religions can serve as collective centers in our time, according to Baha'u'llah, is that they lead to the unity of mankind. And I'm not going to go into what Abdul Baha described as the 7 candles of unity. We talked about the various stages of unity and the various levels of unity that we will see, whether it will be unity of thought and world undertaking, unity of nations, unity of language. These are all practical applications of that unity that will serve to bring us together as a single human family, leading to true oneness. And that really is the ultimate goal of what the Baha'i faith says is for our day and age and the mission of Baha'u'llah. So to conclude, the vision as Baha'u'llah has given this is that humanity does have a unique distinction, and that is to know God and to worship Him, and alone of all creation in the physical world is that capacity. That is what defines us, whether we're different species, perhaps even on different planets, doesn't matter. That entity, that mind that can recognize and know God and aspire towards transcendence and choose to acquire spiritual distinctiveness, that is what defines humanity. And it can only be unlocked and developed under the influence of God's training, which is why, having understood that this is why this creation exists, according to Baha'u'llah, that it would be necessary for us to receive instruction, so we learn how to do that, to reshape the way in which we see the world, and not simply be a prisoner of self, but basically a spiritual creation as well. It recreates our worldview and provides the power to overcome the prison of self. And we require that power just as a plant requires the light of the sun. These lead to 2 important developments: the individual fulfillment of the purpose of why we're here, to the benefit of ourselves as well as to others, but also the advancement of civilization, where we come to larger and larger collective centers, to ultimately we come to an entire humanity as one family on the planet, living in a greater civilization where we live in harmony without war. Both of these, whether it's the individual or the collective, have specific indicators of success by which we can tell if we're making progress in each of these. And it's not left to guesswork. There are indicators that we can look at and say, yes, we actually are achieving it, we actually are making progress. But ultimately, it is that one can see within oneself that benefits oneself and others, and as a human family, a cessation not only of war, but the building of a progressive civilization. So with that, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions.